Hey, one of the big news stories, and we'll wrap it up now, so thank you for giving us some time. But one of the big news stories around the Olympics this time round is the whole transgender athletes competing. As a former athlete, as a former Olympiad, what do you think about that whole conversation?
I agree that there is room for trans athletes to compete. I just don't know how. Okay, and like I know there's protocols in place because I work in the indoor rowing environment, and I'm on a World Rowing Commission and bits and pieces, and they've got a policy, transgender policy, and it's not an easy one. It's 4 years of hormone treatment and blah blah blah, and all of the stuff that you've got to go through in terms of process to get to that point. So it's not like, hey, I'm going to get operation next year. You're competing with all the women or men or vice versa, whatever. There's a huge process involved in that happening. So I understand that it's a really, really touchy subject, but it's not going away. And it's so conversations like this are really good to have, because we need to have these conversations, because we need to keep moving forward. Probably only 40 years ago where they were going, oh, why should we let women compete in our sport?
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's the type of thing that we're at. We're just at a crossroad in our life where, geez, how long ago they're like, no, we don't want women competing in our sport, or we don't want them doing this, or we don't want them as management in the business because they're not as good as men. And you're like, shit, man, we've moved on a long way since then. And I think we're just at a crossroad where there's a lot of stuff like that happening now that we need to talk about now, because in 30 years time, we'll be sitting there going, man, I can't believe they were talking about like that back then. So it's just a natural progression as we go through. And it's a very interesting subject. And I don't know the rights or the wrongs or how it looks, but obviously there's a lot of people in the background making those decisions to make sure that can actually happen, because as I say, not going away. So we have to find out a way to make it inclusive and do what we're doing.
It sounds like what you're saying is, when you use the word conversation, I think about ongoing. I'm not saying that you're saying this, and the reason I said transgender and didn't mention any particular names is that the people who are performing at the Olympics this time around, everyone is following the rules. No one doesn't deserve to be there. No one shouldn't be there, because these are the rules at the moment, and everyone's allowed to follow the rules to compete. That conversation's over. But it sounds like what you're saying when you use the word conversation is it's ongoing. Do you think that we haven't quite got the answer yet? And whilst no one's doing anything wrong, maybe some more nuance needs to come in to find what that answer will be?
Yeah, absolutely, because you don't know what it is and how it looks, because it's never happened before. So that conversation has to happen. At the moment, it might be you have to get your testosterone under a certain level if you're a male coming down to a female. But of course, in years to come, they might be like, you know what, that's too high. Maybe that needs to be even lower. You know what I mean? So there's just different, but we don't have effectively, and it's not the right word to use, but it's the only word to use at the moment. This is an experiment to see if it's right. And then we start moving it on, because the only way to find out whether it's right or wrong is to experiment, right? So that's basically what we're doing now. The conversation is around, are these rules that we're putting in place right now the best rules to have, or do they need to keep adapting over time to figure out what's going to happen and how it looks? So, that's the only thing that you can think of, and it's not going to go away. So this is why the conversation needs to be ongoing. And, what happens in certain sports might not be the same in others. So that's the other side of it as well, is like one rule per all sports or all Olympics isn't going to be the same. It needs to change for different sports, endurance, strength, all the other bits and pieces. And that's really the situation you have, like stand down periods. Maybe 4 years stand down isn't long enough. Maybe it's too long. So how do we know unless we put something out there, we see what happens and then figure it out from there?
Yeah,
it's a great conversation.
It's an interesting conversation, and I think you're right. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson the other day talking to, I think the guy's name's Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro was very, I don't know, what's going on? This is not fair. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's position was, well, be that the case or not, the question is, it is something that's happening in society today, so it needs to be addressed. So he was kind of coming at it from, there's no point arguing shoulds and shouldn'ts, because it is. And his position was, now that we know that it is, how's the best way to do it? And so I think that's similar to what I hear you're saying. And I hope no one takes offense to and I don't think they will, to the word experiment, but the idea that we're talking about, this is not yet settled yet as to what would be fair. But
trial
I think
and error.
Yeah. And
probably a better word.
And I think,
same thing.
I think you're right. It's like, this is what we think is fairest right now. We're going to give this a go. And every sport changes rules, and if this works out to be too heavily weighted one way or the other, then I assume they'll say, so we'll adapt the rules. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right.